Thank you so much, Debbie. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today and to share with you information about communication with Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and also to talk about the new ministry that we want to roll out in collaboration with Dawson Baptist Church and Alzheimer's of Central Alabama. I'm so glad I had seen that video before, because if I hadn't, I'm not sure I wouldn't have had to go get a box of Kleenex. But this morning, when I got in my car to come here, and the radio, comes on because I hadn't turned it off, and it was blaring some really jarring song that I wasn't familiar with, and I thought, well, that's not what I need this morning. And so as I was pulling out of the driveway, I changed the channel, and George Harrison's song, My Sweet Lord, came on. And I don't know if that's a song you're familiar with, but the majority of the song is singing these words: My sweet Lord, I really want to know you. I really want to show you. And I think that's what we're trying to do here today in bringing a ministry to the important work and the lives, the Alabama lives that have been touched by Alzheimer's disease and dementia. We know that there are about 93,000 people with Alzheimer's disease in Alabama, and that number is growing. What we also know is that statistics, things that we knew, because people are always saying, how long, how long? Well, we're seeing people live a very long time. This is not a death sentence anymore. This is a life sentence. This means you've got lots of years of living. You have to find ways to make the most of those years for both patient and caregiver. Because if you're talking about a disease process that may take 10 or 15 years, many changes happening over that time period. You've got to stay involved in life. You've got to go about the business of living. And so this ministry that we'll talk about today will help with that. This is one of my favorite slides, a series of slides. This is Mel York, who's here today. Mel York is with the South Highlands Center, one of our wonderful adult daycares that we have here in Jefferson County. There are also daycares in Shelby and Tuscaloosa. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I think the reason I like these slides so much is because they show the importance of individualized attention and person-centered care. I hear a lot of caregivers say, well, my loved one wouldn't enjoy going to daycare. It's not for my loved one, or my loved one would never participate in the activities. And don't ever say never with this disease, because you don't really know. And I love these slides because they show that if you pick up the paints and the paintbrush, you really give her one-on-one attention, that she can perhaps begin to paint independently on her own. Alzheimer's of Central Alabama is a local organization. If you hear the word national, that's not us. If you hear the word association, that is not us. We are Alzheimer's of Central Alabama. And unfortunately, if you see some really, really beautiful, well-done commercials on TV, that's not us either, because we don't have money for fancy commercials. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the ministry and work that we do and the things that we do for the community at the end. We've been around for 25 years. We serve the central part of the state. And I say that we're local services, local heart, and local soul. Nearly half of us have a personal connection to Alzheimer's disease. I think 25 years ago when we started this organization, there were a lot of families that really weren't even familiar with the word Alzheimer's. I mean, we used other words 25 years ago to describe these very same things, and now it's a very common experience. Lots of us know someone with Alzheimer's disease or have had a family member with Alzheimer's. 7 in 10 of us worry about our own memory, and I'll consider myself in that category, absolutely. Many of us are the worried well. We don't really have anything to worry about. Some of us may be on the road towards a diagnosis, and I love the lifestyle choices that Sally and JC were talking about and the things that they're doing to help keep their minds active, their lives vital, because I think that's important. Every 67 seconds, someone in America develops dementia. You know, there's 5.2 million of us in America, and that's why we call this the silver tsunami. What puts you at greatest risk for developing Alzheimer's is how long you live. We're seeing about 10,000 people nationwide reach their 65th birthday every day. So as more and more people reach that milestone, we're also seeing more and more folks diagnosed. But we're also seeing younger families and younger people being diagnosed, and they have special needs as well. This is some statistics in terms of Alabama and where we're headed. You know, I think what we have to keep in mind is, you know, Alzheimer's disease can be a spiritual crisis, it can be a financial crisis, an emotional crisis, and a physical crisis for caregivers who are providing physical care as well. On average, families spend about $20,000 a year. Now, if you've got your loved one in a long-term care facility of any type, you know that that figure is much, much higher. About 62% of the money that caregivers pay is all out of pocket. So that's why we do some of the important work that Alzheimer's of Central Alabama does to provide services and help to families. Caregivers report high levels of stress. About 60% say that they really suffer from stress. 33%, about a third of all caregivers, suffer from depression. And we talk about that some in our support group meetings that I think really, really benefit and help caregivers and help them learn how to cope. Some years ago, I heard a woman up in Nashville, and she talked about the caregiver's universal dilemma. And as you begin your journey to Alzheimer's disease, I think this is right where a lot of us start. There are some problems going on, and I can't ignore the problems, but I can't fix them either. And sometimes when we can't ignore them and we can't fix them, we do exactly that. We ignore them. We tend to look the other way. We tend to attach other reasons for why these changes are occurring, because it's very difficult to face this disease head on. It's very difficult to have the courage to seek a diagnosis sometimes. It's very difficult to get a loved one to the doctor, and very difficult to begin the journey of caregiving. I want to share some pictures and some stories from some of our folks that we have served on our programs, and they've given us permission to show these pictures. This is Paul. His wife says, "After receiving the diagnosis from my husband, the stress has been overwhelming. We're both deaf and have been all our lives. We were used to living in a silent world, but not being able to hear him leave the house is an added stress. I could no longer leave his side, and night was especially difficult because that's when he would want to wander." So he has a Project Lifesaver bracelet we'll talk about later. She's more at ease, and she knows that if he leaves the house, he could be found. This is Violet. Violet also wandered away from her home and was found by neighbors. We know about 60% of Alzheimer's patients will wander. It's a very dangerous behavioral symptom of the disease. This is Gladys. She's 95. She's cared for by her niece. This is Thomas. He's age 83. He's a Korean War vet. I love this beautiful picture of Jane and Kim. This picture was actually used on their Christmas card this year. Kim says, "The hardest part of caregiving is the loneliness, but her advice is to face each day with new joy." This is Doris and Eileen Eileen's advice is to learn how to accept it. "If you bottle it up, you stay frustrated. I feel better when I remind myself that I have chosen to take care of my mother. I don't look at it like I'm stuck doing it." And finally, his daughter said, "The thing that breaks my heart the most is that my children won't really know him. They won't know what kind of man he was." You know, for our newly diagnosed patients, there's lots of concerns and lots of feelings that they have. We tend to focus a lot on caregivers, or at least I do in my world, But what we're going to talk about here today is about how to communicate, how to reach beyond words, to go deeper than just words, and making connections with our patients. This list of concerns came out of a support group for Alzheimer patients. We've tried that here in the Birmingham area a couple of times. It's difficult to have enough people who understand their diagnosis and want to deal with it at one time to have a support group. But this came out of a group in Ohio. And I think there's some really important things to think about. You know, their concerns are retaining self-confidence, overcoming feelings that people don't trust them, needing more time to absorb what's being said, feeling a sense of belonging. I mean, these are all things that you might feel, you know, in any kind of circumstance where you weren't sure of yourself, whether it was a new job or if you moved to a new city, wherever you're kind of off balance a little bit. Those are the kinds of feelings that dementia patients have. And of course, they themselves, patients who have awareness, worry about what they can do and what they can't do. And for us as caregivers, that's a constant struggle as well. I love this quote, and I've nearly always used it, from Elbert Cole. He was the director of Shepherd Centers of America. He cared for his wife for 17 years, and he says, "The shift from cure to care was an important decision for us. I realized my task was to manage life, while Virginia's task was to enjoy it." And I think that's really what we try to do, is to figure out how to manage life so that life can continue to be enjoyable, can continue to have those moments of connection. Here's some of the best pieces of advice that have come out of my support group. Melba told our group she had to learn to be an actress. It was really hard for her at first. She came to our group on the verge of divorcing her husband. And she finally learned he has a disease that makes him act this way. And in order for us to keep the peace in the house, she finds ways to pet him, to love on him, to agree with him. She's learned to be an actress. And it's worked. And by doing that, he's more peaceful. And by doing that, she's more peaceful. And that means she doesn't always have to be an actress. Sometimes she gets to still be herself. OJ told our group, "I finally learned to do what's good for me and best for my wife." I really like that, because sometimes I hear caregivers making the decisions that are all based on what's best for the patient. And sometimes as a caregiver, you have to realize that you do what's good for them always, but you've also got to take into account what you need. And you may need a break. You may need to make changes in the household. You may need to bring someone in to help you. You may need to reach out and go to a support group. And so you've always got to do what's best for you. And it's okay to make that choice, and it's the right choice always. The last advice came from Elizabeth. Elizabeth told our group that she grades herself every night when she gets in bed. When she is saying her prayers at night, she ends those prayers with, "How did I do today?" And you know what? Sometimes she's made a really bad grade. But you know, making a bad grade one day gives you the opportunity to think, what can I do differently tomorrow? And that's how she looks at that. So it gives her a way to think about how she could improve, what changes she could make, how she might stay calmer. And I think every day then she realizes, this is a new morning, a new day. I can make different choices. I can do differently. So grading herself has really helped. When we think about Alzheimer's disease, it causes global cognitive decline. Now, if you've met one Alzheimer patient, you've met one Alzheimer patient, because they're all different. They all experience different symptoms. They all have different rates of decline and different ways they decline. But these losses tend to be universal. So I'm going to go over these in a little bit of detail. The first one is memory loss. It's the thing that we're most familiar with about Alzheimer's disease. It's that amnesia. But we know that Alzheimer's disease causes a particular kind of memory loss where people have a difficult time remembering current information. They have a difficult time retaining new information and facts. And that's because the part of the brain that stores and processes new information is what's damaged earliest and most severely in the brain. But distant memories may still remain very clear. So while a patient may have difficulty remembering if they took their medication this morning, if they turned the stove off, where they parked their car in the Walmart parking lot, they may still be very comfortable talking about things in the past, things that happened a long time ago. Now, as the disease progresses, that boundary between the past and the present may become more smeared, but in the early stages, that's what we typically see. Difficulties coordinating body movements. You know, what I say is that for a lot of our patients, it's as if they unlearn all of the skills that they've learned over the course of a lifetime. So we're talking about the things that we're supposed to do independently as adults: bathing, grooming, dressing, toileting. Even basic things like walking can become difficult for patients as they unlearn skills that they've learned. And so everything becomes very difficult. Now, one thing that we know, and we don't like to necessarily equate Alzheimer's with children and child rearing, but we do know that Alzheimer patients tend to lose skills in the reverse order that children develop them in. And that's a really interesting model and way of thinking about it. And one reason is because the thing that's hardwired in our brain last, the thing that's not hardwired in our brain until our early 20s, is judgment. And for a lot of Alzheimer patients, judgment is one of the first things to go. And that's why you'll have Alzheimer patients who will continue to say, I can drive, I'm just fine. I'm not turning over my checkbook to you, because they lack insight and they lack good judgment. But as you think about skills that you learn over a lifetime, or skills that you learn gradually over time, think about a skill like getting dressed. You know, that's something that we teach our children in steps, and we teach them gradually. You know, things like that are the most complex would be a skill like tying your shoes, for example, buttons, buckles, those kinds of things. Those might be the skills that they lose first, but the things that they might actually lose first is the ability to pick out what's appropriate to wear for the day, because that's a skill that requires judgment. And they'll lose those skills in that reverse order. Eating is another example. We don't come into this world knowing how to eat. Some of the last skills in learning how to eat are table manners. I don't know if you've been in a group setting with Alzheimer patients, but there is a definite lack of table manners going on right there. It's very evident. So those are sort of what we call the apraxias, the difficulty with pre-programmed body movements. Alzheimer patients have communication problems, and that's what we're all here about today. And this is important to know, because both their transmitter can be damaged and their receiver. Okay, so their transmitter is their ability to speak, to form coherent thoughts and sentences. But what's damaged earlier and more severely is not the ability to speak, it's the ability to comprehend. Very important, because you may think that your patient understands. You may think that they get what you say. You may think that they understand what you want them to do. But their comprehension is damaged, and they may not understand the instructions that you're giving them. Now, another thing happens with our Alzheimer patients is they may lose the ability to say please and thank you, but they don't lose the ability to cuss and curse. And I don't know if any of y'all have experienced that. I always tell this story, and thank goodness this one is about a Baptist minister, a former Baptist minister, but his wife used to tell our group that she was glad that the words her husband said most often were hell and damn, because at least those were biblical terms. But some of us aren't blessed with patients that say hell and damn. Some of us have patients that can go quite a bit further, and particularly when they get very angry. So this is really important to know in terms of communication. And then they suffer from the inability to recognize things. That may be the inability to recognize your face, to recognize the face of a loved one, to recognize their own face in the mirror, to recognize the face of grandchildren. But it can also be to recognize objects. You can hand them their medicine and they don't necessarily recognize it as medicine. You can hand them a toothbrush and they brush their hair with it, because they don't recognize objects for what they are. So this is what we call the global cognitive decline, and it's important for us to be aware of this because this really impacts everything related to communication. Now, we know that Alzheimer patients can also suffer from psychiatric symptoms, and not all patients do, but some do. But this is what I think is the most important things for us to be aware of. I love this quote by Maya Angelou. This one was widely quoted when she died last year. It says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I think for our Alzheimer patients, that goes double. They may forget the words, they may forget what's happening, but they may not forget the emotion attached to the event. And so it's very important in all of our dealings and all of our thinking and working with patients that we're always trying to put a good fingerprint, emotional fingerprint to the activity. Now this slide really shows feelings caused by Alzheimer's disease on one side and positive feelings that we're trying to nurture. Many years ago, I was at a support group in Bessemer. I was a guest speaker, and we went around the room and introduced ourselves, and there was a gentleman, and when we got to him, I realized right away that he had brought his wife with him who was the patient. And he said, "Yep, she is the problem," right in front of her. And he said, "She's always trying to get away. She's always running out the door." And the group proceeded, and I made a note to myself, as soon as this is over with, I'm going over there to give that lady a hug, because she really looked like she needed one. But at the end of the meeting, she got up and ran out the door. And he was standing there saying, "There she goes, there she goes." And I'm thinking, no kidding, she has dementia, but she's not dumb. Her husband has embarrassed her in front of a group. I was at a neighborhood gathering, and one of my neighbors whose husband has Alzheimer's said right in front of him, "Yeah, to look at him, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong with him, but he doesn't have a mind anymore." And her husband looked me right in the eye and said, "Is she talking about me?" Would you say something like that in front of someone? No, but for some reason, many times with Alzheimer patients, we think it's okay to talk like that or treat them like that or marginalize their feelings, and it's not. We have to remember, just because they have dementia does not mean that they're dumb. They still have feelings, they still have emotions, they still pick up on the nonverbal cues that let them know how you feel about them. So we're trying to get past fear.
People talking baby talk.
Right, people talking baby talk.
That drives me bonkers.
Okay, Kim's over here, and she's saying don't talk in baby talk. Because, again, you're marginalizing the fact that these are adults that we're talking to. And we always want to show them and give them the dignity that they deserve and they deserve and they need. So feelings of paranoia, feelings of anger, feelings of embarrassment. We combat these feelings by giving them the emotions that they need, giving them the words, giving them the kindness through our expressions and body language. I like this quote from George Bernard Shaw: "The problem with communication is the illusion that it's been achieved." And I think, sometimes if you're in, say, a facility, a nursing home, for example, and you've got a patient who's in the bed, and somebody bursts into the room and says, "Hey, how you doing this morning, Miss Jones?" And you're pulling up the blinds. It's time for your bath. I'm going to get you up now. He's yanking back the covers. You are startling someone. You know, you may feel like you've talked to them in a cheerful voice. You may feel like you've gotten the point across, but what you've done is really startle. And you would enter someone's room that was unaware, that was unfocused, very quietly and calmly, and give them a gentle stroke. How are you doing this morning? We're going to get you up. You would talk to them in that sort of way. Now, rationalizing and reasoning are the big no-nos. I just can't tell you how many times we get a call from someone on the phone, or we have this in our support group where someone is sharing a story, and I have to say, wait. Okay, now what you're doing is rationalizing and reasoning, because we've really got to work beyond that. We've really got to learn to redirect, and that can be very, very difficult because rationalizing and reasoning has been our pattern of communication with this person for the entirety of our relationship. And if you're taking care of a parent for your whole life, they've talked to you rationally, and you have responded with rational talk. And now that doesn't necessarily work. Someone in the support group on Tuesday said, you know, the problem with her husband is still very, very functional, very, very functioning. But she said he has fixed false beliefs. And he'll hear her say something or hear her on the phone with Susie, and then he'll say, well, aren't we going to dinner with Susie tonight? No, we're not going to dinner with Susie tonight. I was just on the phone with her. Well, when are we going to dinner with Susie? And it goes on because he will get this fixed false belief. And sometimes for our caregivers, when we say redirect, don't rationalize and reason, they're like, well, that's just not even a helpful bunch of advice, because it's very difficult to do with a patient who is saying, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, and they are at home. And so it can be difficult to find a path around some of these behaviors, to find a way to distract. But we have to have some tricks in our toolkit, in our toolbox, and that's what I really think a lot of this is about. Nothing works every single time, but you've got to have some methods and some things that you do try in redirecting a patient. The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And that's, again, where words don't always get it. And we have to begin to think of the language of Alzheimer's disease, of touch, of music, of sight. These are the things that are most important. So learning the Alzheimer's language is much like learning to read the physical cues. And if we were caring for a baby, we all instinctively know things to do if a baby is upset. We see if the baby is wet. We see if the baby is hungry. We see if the baby is cold and needs to be wrapped up in a blanket. But you know what we do most of the time with the baby when the baby cries and is distressed? We pick the baby up and we hold the baby. And sometimes when our Alzheimer patients are distressed, that's exactly what they need. That's exactly what they're communicating with us, but we don't often stop and give that to them. We don't often stop and hold their hand or rub their shoulders or distract in a way that communicates, I love you. So you've got to think about, are they thirsty? Do they need to go to the bathroom? Are they just bored with what's going on? Donna Lott's here. Donna's been working in daycares for years. And Donna, many, many years ago, had a woman who had a job in radio, I believe. And in that daycare setting, she would always try to get into the supply closet. Well, somebody had left the closet open one day, which was like a field day for this Alzheimer patient. She was in there busily rearranging. I don't know if any of y'all have one that likes to rearrange, but she was busy trying to accomplish the elusive project. And one of the daycare workers went over to her and said, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be in in there," and shutting those doors, like almost shutting her fingers in there. And Donna said, "Why don't you come sit in my office with me?" And they went in the office, and sat there quietly for a few minutes, and Donna said, "You don't like being told what to do?" And she said, "No, I never have." So we have to think of a better way to distract her away from the closet rather than scolding. You know, we have to find a way. We've got to learn the Alzheimer's language. Now, the ABCs of ADLs, so very important. ADLs are the things that we all learn to do independently. These are things like bathing, grooming, dressing, toileting. These are the things that really lead to the downfall in a lot of caregiving relationships because it can be so very difficult to take over these kinds of activities of daily living with our patients. So I think, we've got to think of some ways to make it more manageable. I'm going to tell you a story that I've shared a whole lot of times, and this was about that same Baptist minister that said hell and damn a lot. Him and his wife lived in a retirement community, and she was in a wheelchair, and she had a little scooter, and she did a brilliant job caring for him. She had been a special education teacher, and those lessons really gave her a lot of strategies to try with her husband. Every afternoon when he got restless, she would say, "How about a moon pie?" I loved that because I think that would calm me down if I was restless. So they would have a snack. She would get on her scooter, and they would go outside if it was a nice day, and they would ride around the parking lot. He would walk, she would ride, and he would get rid of and expend some of that pent-up energy, and then he was ready to come back in. But, as this disease goes, things begin to progress, and he was not able to handle his bathing anymore, and so she was going to have to bring someone in to help. And the very first time led to a huge disaster. Now, this was some years ago, and I would like to say that this would never happen now, that we would never send someone in that was so ill-prepared to care for someone as this particular nursing assistant was. But Annie was in the den in her wheelchair. She couldn't get back in the bathroom where the aide was and her husband, but she could hear it was not going well. And this is a Baptist minister, and there's a stranger in the bathroom trying to get his clothes off. How do you think he was responding? Not well. And so as things escalated, Annie said, "If you will tell him what you're going to do before you do it, he responds better." No response. Things were seeming to escalate worse, and Annie said, "When he gets really upset, I just sing Amazing Grace to him." And the nursing assistant said, "I don't have time for that." Well, do you know what her husband did? He grabbed that assistant's hand and bent her finger back and broke it. Emergency personnel came, ambulances came. He was taken to the hospital because it was deemed that he needed a medication adjustment. As we know, if you've been in that situation, a medication adjustment and a long hospitalization doesn't often lead to very good results, and it didn't for him. He was no longer able to walk, and he had to go to a nursing home, and they were separated. And the reason they were separated was because someone didn't have time to sing Amazing Grace to him. So when we think about activities of daily living, we have to think about how we come across to them. And oftentimes it's through the nonverbal. The nonverbal, that's what was getting to Annie's husband. So we have to be aware of how we come across to them. We have to be aware, did they feel safe? Did they feel secure? Did they feel warm enough in this bathroom to take their clothes off? We have to break it down into very, very small bite-sized pieces. You can't say, "Mom, go take your shower," because Alzheimer patients have a very difficult time doing anything that is sequential and has lots of steps involved. You say, "Mom, let's go get your bath," as you gently lead her in the bathroom, as you're turning on the water, as you're either demonstrating how to unbutton or you're actually doing it for her. You've got to break it down into small, bite-sized pieces. And then calm, cool, collected communication. Being calm is so important with our patients. Have y'all ever seen little children learning how to walk, little toddlers getting up and toddling? And you'll see one little baby and it'll take a tumble, and the mother will rush over to the baby and pick it up. Oh my goodness, are you okay? And what happens? The baby will start to cry. But there's another mother, when her baby does that, she'll say, uh-oh, you all right? Get up, go on. And that mother's probably already got 2 or 3 older children. But, that baby gets right up and is just fine. And that's because the baby's not just reacting to their little tumble that they took. The baby is responding to their mother. So the mother that has calm, cool, collected communication wins. And so does the caregiver. Because you want to diffuse the situation. You don't want it to escalate. And calm, cool, collected communication does that for you every time. Now, these are 3 challenges that are typical, but, you may have to change exactly what's going on in the example to how it fits in your situation. But I got to tell you, if you're going to be a successful caregiver, you have to stop being annoyed by their behaviors. And that is hard. Now, you can give yourself a grade at the end of the day, and your grade may not be a good one if you do get annoyed, but the next day you've got to wake up resolved to get less annoyed, because that's the best way you're going to manage your Alzheimer patient. So you've got to stop scolding, stop being annoyed. And with this repeated questions or repeated statements, this I want to go home, this what time are you coming to get me, when is dinner, whatever it is, you've got to begin to find a response that works. And so the worst thing that we do is to go into long, lengthy explanations. And that's the thing that we all tend to want to do with our patient. The shortest, simplest answer that satisfies them is a better response, because they can't even understand and process that long explanation. So the shorter response is best, but the best response is the one that distracts. Dinner's in a while, let's go use the bathroom and wash our hands. As you gently lead them into the bathroom and wash their hands. Risky behavior in driving. Well, now this one came up in a big, big way, and the caregiver who told this story, or whose husband shared this story, is here with us today about her sister Jean, because we had a lot of people there that were saying, now my husband's still driving, and yeah, we're monitoring it, but okay, well, here's what I have to say about that decision to continue to let patients drive. When you're wondering if it's safe for them to drive, it's probably not. Okay, that's just a good rule of thumb. But in this situation, the family had continued to let her drive, and she wasn't going anywhere, but just a few places, just the same places she'd always gone. And on this particular Saturday, she was going to get her hair done, and when she pulled out on the main road, she was supposed to go right, but she turned left on this particular day. It happened to be the day of, I believe he said, the Alabama LSU game in 2011. She drove all the way from Birmingham to Tuscaloosa and all that traffic, made it all the way to Butler, Alabama, and was finally stopped after she had driven 11 miles on the wrong side of the road. And praise the Lord, hadn't hit anybody. So, our thinking that driving is okay, I don't know, are you waiting for that kind of crisis? Because up until that day, up until then, it had been okay for her to drive. So the worst response is those of us who continue to say it's okay. A better response is I'm beginning to monitor it. I'm very aware. But what we really want to move towards is working with our physician and helping us determine when driving is still safe. Better yet, out of sight, out of mind, move the car. We have had success with dismantling something under the hood so it doesn't work. given them a set of keys that doesn't work anymore. So maybe they've still got keys, but just not the keys that actually operate the car. And I tell my caregivers, when we think about making this decision or many others, firearms in the home is another very big issue that can become very dangerous very quickly. You have to think much like you think when you raise your children. It's not about what makes them happy. It's about what keeps them safe and secure. And as long as you are making decisions based on what makes them safe and secure, you're making the best decisions for them and really for all of us in the community. Patience and acceptance. We never perfect patience, but we must always be working to improve on our patience. So we have to move from being frustrated that they won't do this, they won't do that, I need him to cooperate and he just won't, to understanding he can't. He can't because of the disease process. You have to really change your way of thinking and change your expectations. And the most important thing is to convey that you love them, you're there for them, you support them, and in everything you do. And sometimes just saying those words can help diffuse the situation. And here's some barriers to effective communication. Really, the ability to see, your dementia patients, particularly in the latter stages, may not very quickly turn their head towards the source of your voice, towards you speaking. So it's really important that you have gotten to the front of them where they can actually see you, see your face, see your lips moving, because that helps them understand what's going on. The ability to comprehend, as we said, is damaged, so speak very slowly, use very short sentences that help make a real difference. Hearing loss. Oh my goodness now, hearing loss is huge. It's a huge issue in my support group, and we're just talking about the caregivers in there. So it is really important for us to understand how hearing loss impacts their ability to comprehend. I had a family in for counseling, and it was a beautiful, many children were there. It was a second wife that was there, and they were all trying to figure out what to do, and so they were still trying to find ways to keep him engaged, and they had taken him down to this new restaurant in Mountain Brook Village called Brick and Tin, and I don't know if any of y'all have eaten in there. It's got to be one of the loudest restaurants in town. And he's got hearing problems. Not a good choice, unless you go in the off hours, and maybe that would work, I don't know. But we've got to be very, very aware of hearing loss and how that impacts our patients. An ability to recognize and use information. And, we've really got to be mindful of helping guide them rather than expecting them to know what to do. There's a caregiver here, and he said he took his wife to dinner, and she picked up her straw and tried to eat her salad with it. Well, it's time to help with the straw before that becomes a problem. It's time to take that straw from her and put it in her drink and put it towards her lips. It's trying to hand that fork to her and mimic how to begin to eat. It's time to use those nonverbal ways of communicating. So, facial expressions. What about teeth gritting? I'm a really bad teeth gritter. I don't know about y'all, but it doesn't convey peacefulness and it doesn't convey happiness. It conveys that you're annoyed and that you're angry, even if you're not. So, and sometimes we are angry and annoyed. So really work on facial expressions. Gestures. They can be either soothing gestures or not. What about clenched fists? Well, if you're standing there, Mother, we got to take a bath, you're not going to get very far because she's not coming with that angry caregiver. She's not going to follow you anywhere. Writing can be really helpful. And we have found some success, particularly with patients who have the same repeated question over and over again. Get yourself some index cards and write the answer on the index card and hand it to them. And when they ask you that same question, say, look at your card. Look at your card. It might work, it might not, but somehow for the caregiver, it's just one more strategy to try and can help. But also writing and giving them a calendar of what's going to happen. Give them a guideline of what's happening for the day. Now, touch can communicate so much. You know, think about when somebody gives you a handshake that's weak, or a timid tap on the shoulder, or a reassuring back slap, or maybe they go too hard and you know what the difference is there. The patronizing pat on the arm. Oh, come with me. That's the baby talk we were talking about. A grip on the elbow that can be comforting and gentle, or can be just too much and show dominance. And so you've really got to think about what all these things mean non-verbally, the cues that you're giving your patient. You know, eye contact, as we've talked about before, is the biggest human connection. So make certain that you have made eye contact, that you have gotten through the haze. One of the things in the video that we saw, you know, she got right up close to her and was touching her face and making certain that she had her attention as they progressed. And she said it was almost like we were one person because, you know, open your eyes, she said to her, so that they had really made that connection. And body language, you know, and we've all, you know, can convey so much. Now, using your voice as a tool, I think timing and pace is very important. We want to speak slowly and clearly, use words, very simple words. You know, I had a caregiver that said if she told her mother, "Mama, come over here and sit down," her mother couldn't do it. But if she would say, "Come here, sit," those were instructions her mother could follow. So you've got to remember, even sequencing can become a problem, so make sure you're giving one command at a time instead of lumping multiple commands together. Volume is important with your voice. The loudness does impact comprehension. Don't think just because you're talking louder, that means that someone that's deaf can hear you. Because sometimes the louder you talk, the more it just sounds like noise, and what you really need to do is to speak more clearly and concisely, right closer to them, as opposed to yelling at them. Tone and inflection, I think we all know this. I was trying to think if I was a good enough actress myself to pull this off, and I probably am not. But what, you know, I think we all can hear the difference between saying, "Yeah, right," "Yes, that's right." Think about the sarcasm that comes through in your voice, the anger that comes through in your voice, because that's what they're going to pick up on. And always use sounds that convey understanding. Yes, that's right, with a gentle touch. Finding your caregiving rhythm. You know, I think for a lot of us, we tend to be very, very rigid. And rigidity does not work in caregiving. You know, we've really got to learn to be the jellyfish and go with the flow. These are some of my beautiful caregiving ministers, two of them. This is Barbara Crane and City Allen. City's here with us. And they were the honorary chairs of Alzheimer's of Central Alabama's walk this year. Barbara has lost her husband, Ted, and City still cares for her husband, Tommy. These two women were friends for how many years? Over 30 years. And as their husbands developed Alzheimer's, I guess their bond changed and probably strengthened. They carpooled together to daycare. And they cared in very different ways because, as I said, both of their husbands had dementia or had Alzheimer's disease or had something because they had some varying diagnoses. Their patients were so different, they had to respond to their needs in very different ways. Barbara's husband, Ted, lost his language skills very early. He was an engineer. Both of them were engineers, but for Ted, rhythm became very important. Numbering became very important. Barbara says she knew the number of steps from the bed to the kitchen because he could walk just that far. If everything was very measured, he could handle it. If she was getting him dressed, she would count as the belt went through the belt loops, because counting and numbers and rhythm were so important. Now, City didn't have those kind of issues. Her husband still has very good language skills and still is witty and occasionally very clever in the things that he says. But you know what else he does? He quacks. Not a little bit. He's quacked a lot over the years, hasn't he? Because it's gone on for many, many years. And for them, the rhythm of caregiving is about laughter. It's about the nonverbal communication that laughter gives them. And so, even though Tommy is unable to do tasks for himself, he's still very social, and he's still able to get out and go. So for every one of us, our experience can be very different. But for each of us, we have to find the rhythm in what works. I've got just a few more minutes, and I want to tell you about Alzheimer's of Central Alabama. Many of you know about our organization because some of you are on our service programs, but not everybody here knows what we do. And as I said, we're not part of a national association. We're a local organization that raises money locally, that stays here in Alabama, that helps our Alabama families. And I think it's so important because the work that we're doing is helping families that are hurting now. So one of the things that we do is working to diminish the risk of wandering by offering Care Track. Now, we're about to transition this program to Project Lifesaver. We're working now with the State Troopers Association. Derek Smith is here with us. Raise your hand so people know. If y'all have got issues related to wandering, because this is a huge, huge problem. As I said, 60% of our patients will wander. Those that do tend to do so repeatedly. This is a newspaper article from about a year ago, right before the snow hit. A woman wandered away. Her daughter had left her at home alone because she didn't have any options, and she said, "Mother, I'll be home from work at 8 o'clock. Well, the daughter may have been home by 8 o'clock, but the mother was gone, and they didn't find her for a couple of days. Just last month, a woman in McCalla, an 89-year-old woman, wandered out of the door, and they found her not even a stone's throw from her house, but too late the next morning. And so wandering is so dangerous, and we want patients that wander to have the opportunity to wear a Project Lifesaver bracelet that emits a radio tracking signal that can help us find them if they wander and are lost. This slide, I'm missing a slide, that's William, who is on our Care Track program. And I love this picture. It's kind of hard to see what it is. William worked down at the downtown Sheraton and shined shoes, and he is always talking about wanting to go to work. So if his wife's not watching him, he's out the door to go to work, as many patients are. He's got somewhere important to be. We provide scholarships for patients to attend adult daycare centers. Adult daycare is one of the best options for caregivers because it provides appropriate stimulation for patients that helps keep them engaged and active. But it also gives the caregiver a break. But to me, the best value is that engagement that it gives the patient. I have some caregivers who will say, well, my patient is not ready for daycare. You know, I went and looked, and my husband's more functional than that. And I say, great, then that's the time when they ought to go. Because for the patient that is not the most functional in any other environment they go to, wouldn't it be great to be the head of the class, to be the best of the class at daycare? You know, they like that sense of mastery, just like we all did. And all like to be the smartest or the best or to be able to be the helper. So daycare, don't put it off. Use it earlier rather than later. This is Naomi and Rick says about his mom that she still hugs people. She still holds hands when other people seem to be upset. This is Lily Mae and Brenda, and she says, my mother enjoyed helping people and nursing them back to health. Now it's hard for her to get up from the chair once she sits down. Sometimes I get her up by saying, Medea, come here. I need you to help me. And she says, okay, and she'll try to get up. We provide continence products that are delivered to the door of families. I think this is really important because, if you don't have a clean diaper for your loved one, it'd be really hard to live with a lot of hope. And this is an important program that we help about 80 families every month with diapers. This is Queenie, and love these pictures of Queenie and that grandchild. Queenie's lost her battle with Alzheimer's now, but I know you can't see in these pictures. Her family sent about 12 different pictures to us, that one where she's on the bed there. But Queenie's fingernails are painted red. And I just have to say I love that, because if you're painting somebody's fingernails red, boy, you are loving them and giving them good care. I think that's a really beautiful thing. We do support research, and we funded 22 grants at Alabama universities. And I think that's, again, an important part of what we do. One of the researchers that we funded, Marissa Nelson Love, I don't know if she made it here today. She is trying to recruit some caregivers to participate in some of her studies, and would through email like to get that kind of information out to you. This is Ruby. Ruby has become sort of our poster child for Alzheimer's. I'm going to read just a little bit about her. Ruby was in her 80s, was still a sitter. She took care of a woman who was 102. And she goes to daycare still. She would not have been receptive going to daycare had she not believed she was going to help them. This is Ruby at the daycare. You can see she has enjoyed painting a picture. She's really had a lot of support from daycare over the years. But for her daughter, it's still hard. And she says, some days I think I can't do this anymore, and today was one of those days. And I'm tired, and I can hardly leave Mother alone at all, but I pick her up from daycare around 4:40, and some days she doesn't want to leave. Now this is some years later. Now I think Ruby has had Alzheimer's and been going to the support group for about 3 years. One of the things that they had to give up was hair dye, coloring her hair, and she got a lot of grief from family members who equated her not coloring her mother's hair with not caring for her mother. Couldn't be further from the truth, but she had to make different changes. She had some problems with her mother at night and with her colostomy bag, and she called our office and said, what can I do? And we'd given her lots of hints and instructions about ways to make the bed and things to make her burden of taking care of her mother's incontinence better. And we finally recommended these one-piece pajamas, and she said, that they have really worked and helped, and please pass that on to other caregivers. So there's Ruby in her one-piece pajamas. This is Ruby at our walk this past year, and I don't know if you can tell, but she is holding her baby doll, and her baby doll is wearing a balloon hat because everybody at the walk needs a balloon hat. But this is what Joanne says. We could have fought it, feared it, or falter in it, but somehow we just faced it, often with a smile, one day at a time. I think I'm in a place of not giving up, but just trying not to give out and get through it with grace and dignity for my mother. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's the one thing I want to do the very best I can with no regrets. The newest member of our family, Mother's baby doll, has brought us so much joy and laughter. Who would have thought it? I got an update from Joanne earlier this week. Her mother is on hospice, and she wrote me an email, and it started out, great news. And, it's never great news when a loved one is on hospice, but it's great news because she's getting another level of care that she didn't know was possible. She's going to continue going to daycare, and she said, we're going to go on Tuesdays and Thursdays because that's the day they have music therapy, and that's the day Mom needs to be there. The ministry of presence is the very heart of human connectedness. Don't ever discount the value of sitting and holding someone's hand. Don't ever discount just how important being with the patient is and building moments of joy and conveying, I love you, I care for you, you will always be looked after. Because as their world slips from them, as they slip from us, we've got to be there underneath to hold up. And that ministry of presence is what allows us to do that. Thank you very much.